Throughout the history of baseball, there are many teams that have a long, proud standing history filled with times of soaring to great heights and have been at the lowest of lows. But few teams can compare to the history and integrity of the Chicago Cubs. The history of Wrigley Field dates back to 1914 and is nicknamed the Friendly Confines and is the second oldest ballpark behind Fenway Park, which is home to the Boston Red Sox. Wrigley Field was constructed by a man named Charles Wigman and constructed the stadium, which was originally designed for the Chicago Whales, which was a Federal League football team. Charles selected a man named Zachary Taylor Davis as the person who had developed the plans for the 14,000-seat ballpark. Originally, Wrigley Field was known as the Northside Park, but Wigman renamed it after himself. The field consisted of wooden bleachers that ran in a V shape behind home plate and ran along the sides of the baselines. The stadium's construction was completed on April 23, 1914, and cost a total of $250,000. Wigman Field was the first of its kind with having permanent concession stands. Before this, people would have to buy their food and snacks from mobile vendors. The stadium was home to the Chicago Whales for only 2 years before the Federal League went bankrupt. During this time, the Chicago Cubs were playing on the west side of Chicago at West Side Grounds. After the 1915 season, Charles Wigman bought the Cubs and brought the team to his newly constructed ballpark in 1916. Wigman would eventually sell the Cubs to a man named William Wrigley Jr. in 1920, and with this transaction, major renovations began to happen to Wigman Field. In 1926, the field was later renamed Wrigley Field, and the capacity more than doubled, now being able to hold 38,396 people. The lights to the field were added in 1942, but would later be donated to the U.S. during World War II. But the most distinct and famous addition to the field was the planting of the ivy at the base of the outfield wall, which would change the identity of the stadium forever. Since the 40s, Wrigley Field has only changed a little bit. The Tribune Company bought the Cubs in 1981 and discussed installing lights to the stadium, but would drag their feet through this process. During the playoffs of 1984, the Cubs were threatened by the league, stating that the games would be moved to a location with lights. After this altercation, lights were added to the field. In the 1989 season, private boxes were added to the mezzanine level, and after the 2003 series, the Cubs added 200 seats directly behind home plate. One of the biggest transformations for Wrigley Field would come in the 2014 season and would cost $575 million. This project would be known as the 1060 Project, and nearly every part of Wrigley Field would be upgraded over a 4-year period. This project would include many additions to the stadium, including the installment of 300 more seats and a 95 by 42 foot HD video board, with another one being added to right field. But the field isn't the only thing that has changed throughout the years. When the Chicago Cubs would officially be known as the Cubs in 1903, the team uniforms were the plainest of plain, a white standard fold-down collared shirt with a pocket on the left breast and a simplified Old English C adorned on the pocket of the gray road uniforms. Since then, Cubs jerseys have gone through multiple different changes with modifications and experimentations to the logo and colors. However, it wasn't until around 1969 when the home uniforms took the familiar form to what Cubs fans see today, with pinstripes and a red and blue circular Cubs logo. The late 1970s and 80s saw some unique road jersey versions. In 1876, the Chicago Cubs were still originally known as the Chicago White Stockings and would become one of 8 charter members of the National League. On April 25, 1876, the team would play the first games in the history of the Chicago League Ball Club, with A.G. Spalding doubling as a manager and the pitcher, and records the first NL shutout with a 4-0 win over Louisville. That season, the White Stockings would go to win the inaugural National League Championship with a record of 52-12. This time, they would also go by the nicknames such as the White Stockings, Colts, and Orphans, and they would play in 5 different ballparks in the 1800s. The origin of the name Cubs isn't precisely known, but one story is that in 1901 and 1902, the team was full of rookies, and on March 27, 1902, a reporter from the Chicago Daily News referred to the team as Cubs with the name eventually sticking. The Cubs were one of the first Major League teams to implement pinstripes as part of their uniforms, along with the Boston Braves and Brooklyn Dodgers. This practice would begin with the team playing in the 1907 World Series and would add this design to their jersey. In 1909, the uniform would change and go to a cadet-style color along with the name Chicago written across it. This design would later be repeated by teams in the Major League. And like the 1908 jersey, there are still buttons going down the jersey, but it's still a pullover style. And the year 1909 was the first time the Cubs had a large C with a smaller UBS inside of it, and would be from their most successful era when they made it to the World Series 4 times in only 5 years: 1906, 1907, 1908, and 1910, with the team winning it all in 1907 and 1908. For over 100 years, teams would wear their jersey with their home city on the road and their jersey with their nickname on front of it for the home jerseys. What makes this design so special for the Cubs is that this was the first time both the city and nickname appeared on the same jersey. During the 1942 through 1945 seasons, all teams would wear a wartime sleeve patch, and a health patch was worn during the 1942 season. Part of a wartime health and fitness awareness campaign from 1943 and 45, a Stars and Stripes patch was worn. Although this number were added to the front of the jerseys for the first time in history, making its appearance in 1952, with the Brooklyn Dodgers being the first ones to do this. This jersey is what is referred to nowadays as a third jersey. This is now commonly seen throughout the league starting in the 1990s. They can be worn at both home and road games and gives a team an additional option on what to wear when they play a series. But now teams have even began adding a 4th and 5th jersey to their rotation, which has led to an increased revenue by all teams. With all this history, it is only fitting that the team who has the honor of wearing a Cubs uniform continues this legacy. For the longest time, the Cubs have had a reputation of having a losing record and known for being one of the worst teams in the MLB. However, a major change would be coming for the Cubs that would change its reputation. It all started when the owner, Tom Ricketts, fired the manager, Jim Hendry. Tom was looking for someone who would pull the team together and snap a 108-year World Series drought. After scouting the MLB, he found his guy, Theo Epstein. Theo was the person who built the Red Sox organization and made a run and won the World Series in 2004. Theo came to the Cubs with the same goal in mind, to win another World Series. One of the biggest moves that he made was finding a manager who could run the team during the games. For this, he turned to Joe Maddon. With Maddon on board, now they can go about building their roster. This new roster had to be filled with young talent, a group of kids who they will be able to make a dynasty with. This would be no simple matter and would take years to perfect. Unfortunately, this would also mean that some players would either have to be traded or dropped. In 2011, they began to drop or trade players that they didn't need. Within a month, the Cubs had gotten rid of 8 players and began recruiting. One of the biggest recruits at this time was first baseman Anthony Rizzo and pitcher Travis Wood. Travis Wood was signed on December 23, 2011, and originally played for the Cincinnati Reds. And first baseman Anthony Rizzo was acquired from the San Diego Padres and was signed January 6, 2012. On July 31, 2012, the Cubs acquired Kyle Hendricks from the Texas Rangers, and one of the biggest players the Cubs acquired, the famous young prospect Kris Bryant, in the 2013 MLB Draft. The Cubs got their ace pitcher, Jake Arrieta, on July 2, 2013, from the Baltimore Orioles, and John Lester was signed as a free agent on December 15, 2014. And David Ross was signed as a free agent on December 23, 2014. One of the biggest moves for the Cubs was finding a closer who could slam the door and close the games in the World Series, and were able to get one of the best closers in baseball from the Yankees, Aroldis Chapman, in July 25, 2016. With this move, the Cubs completed their roster that would win the 2016 World Series, ending all curses and the 109-year title drought. While many teams have an amazing history behind them, None come close to what the Cubs have been through and accomplished throughout its life.